Have you ever like sat down and really tried to think about what makes us human? Like what really sets us apart? It's one of those questions that kind of keeps coming back to me. And I was reading all this stuff about, our earliest ancestors. And it turns out it's way more complicated than you might think. It's not just about walking upright or using tools. So today we're going on this deep dive into the origin and evolution of early Homo. We'll explore what truly makes us unique and how we got here. Okay, so first we got to rewind the clock, like way back, I'm talking millions of years, to the time of Homo habilis, around 2 million years ago. And their discovery really shook things up in paleontology because back then everyone thought Homo erectus was the oldest member of our genus. But then Homo habilis shows up with a bigger brain than its Australopithecus ancestors. And get this, they were using stone tools. Like the oldest ones we found, those Oldowan tools. Pretty cool, huh? Now, of course, there was some debate. Some scientists were like, nope, not a new species, just a weird Australopithecus. But then more fossils were discovered, more evidence. And by the late 70s, Homo habilis was officially part of the club. This whole debate about where Homo habilis fit in actually made scientists rethink how we define a genus. Like, what does it really mean to belong to the same group? It's not just about looking similar, right? It's about shared ancestry and being adapted in similar ways. But even that gets complicated because adaptations can be about physical stuff, but also about behavior, how you use tools, all that. So where does Homo actually begin? Well, you got to consider shared ancestry and how they were adapted to their environment. And this is where things get interesting because some folks argue that Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis, another early human, shouldn't even be in the Homo genus at all. They say that they're more like Australopithecus because they don't have all the same features as later Homo, especially Homo erectus. But others are like, well, hold on, just because they're early versions doesn't mean they're not part of the family. It's like arguing about whether your second cousin twice removed counts for the family reunion. Complicated, right? And get this, even within Homo, there's a ton of variation. Homo erectus, for example, was a total rock star compared to those earlier Homo species. Their brains were bigger. They had those classic brow ridges, the ones that make them look kind of grumpy in museum reconstructions. And their bodies were built for walking and running long distances. Like, seriously, Homo erectus might have been the first marathon runner in the family. Picture this. They're out on the African savanna chasing antelopes under the scorching sun. The antelope is faster, sure, but Homo erectus just keeps going and going until the antelope is exhausted and collapses. Dinner time. This whole idea called persistence hunting is still practiced by some hunter-gatherer groups today. It's pretty incredible to think that Homo erectus might have been doing this like 2 million years ago. But there's a bit of a mystery here. Their shoulders weren't actually that great for throwing. Remember how I mentioned that our shoulders are positioned perfectly for hurling spears and stuff? Well, Homo erectus didn't quite have that figured out. So how did they hunt if they weren't good throwers and persistence hunting wasn't always an option? Makes you think, right. And don't forget, Homo erectus wasn't just about running and hunting. They were also making tools using fire, maybe even doing some early art. These were complex creatures, way more than just the simple cavemen we often imagine. Speaking of tools, let's talk about those Acheulean hand axes Homo erectus was making. They were like the Swiss Army knives of the Stone Age, symmetrical, carefully shaped, and perfect for all sorts of tasks, from butchering animals to chopping wood. And here's the mind-blowing part. To make these tools, they had to plan ahead. Like, they had to picture the finished hand axe in their minds before they even started chipping away at the stone. That's a level of abstract thought that was totally revolutionary. It's like, imagine trying to carve a perfect swan out of ice without having a picture of a swan to guide you. Pretty tough, right? But Homo erectus was doing this with their hand axes, and it tells us they were capable of some serious mental gymnastics. And then there's fire. Can you imagine life without fire? No s'mores, no cozy campfires, no way to cook your food, bird no thanks. But seriously, controlling fire was a total game changer for Homo erectus. It kept them warm, to guard off predators, and allowed them to cook food, which made it easier to digest and probably tasted way better than raw gazelles. So we're starting to see how Homo erectus was pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be human. They were adapting, innovating, and honestly just being super cool. But hold on, because it gets even more interesting. We're going to dive deeper into their world, what they were eating, how they were growing up, and how the changing African environment shaped their evolution. Stay tuned, folks, because the story of Homo erectus is just getting started. Okay, so remember how we were just saying that Homo erectus was super adaptable and innovative? Well, to really get them, you got to understand what they were up against, right? Like, what was Africa like back then? Was it all like lions and gazelles and just endless savannas? Well, not quite. It turns out Africa during the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs was going through some serious mood swings, like climate-wise. I mean, we're talking major shifts, periods of tons of rain followed by super dry spells, like really dry. And these weren't just like a rainy decade here or there. We're talking cycles that lasted thousands of years. Now imagine you're a hominin just trying to make a living in that kind of environment. You got to be flexible, right? You got to be able to find food and water no matter what crazy weather comes your way. And guess what? That's exactly what we see in the fossil record. It's almost like clockwork. Whenever there's a big climate shift, boom, no, a new Homo species pops up. Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, Homo erectus, they all appear right when things are getting shaken up. It's like evolution was running its own experiments, trying out different solutions to survive in this unpredictable world. And it wasn't just our ancestors who were feeling the pressure. The whole ecosystem was in a constant state of flux. New plants and animals were evolving while others were, going extinct. It was a wild time to be alive. Let me tell you, survival of the fittest and all that. So how did early Homo manage to make it? Well, one key was their diet. They weren't picky eaters at all, like some of those primates who only eat like specific leaves or fruits. They were what scientists call generalists, meaning they could eat a wide range of stuff. Fruits, leaves, meat, even those hard nuts and seeds that'll break your teeth if you're not careful. And this dietary flexibility was crucial. When there was plenty of food, they could feast on whatever was around. But when things got tough, they could switch to less appealing options like digging up those starchy tubers, like roots and bulbs, or scavenging the leftovers from a lion kill. Not glamorous, but it kept them alive. And this is where that endurance running thing comes back into play. Imagine you're a Homo erectus on a hot African day and you spot a herd of antelopes. They're way faster than you in short bursts, but you can keep going for miles and miles. Eventually, the antelope is going to overheat and collapse, and boom, dinner is served. It might take a while, but hey, patience is a virtue, right? But endurance running wasn't just for hunting. It was also useful for scavenging, which was a big part of their diet. If a group of Homo erectus found a dead animal, they could outrun other scavengers, like hyenas, to get there first. Plus, being able to cover large distances meant they were more likely to find those carcasses in the first place. So basically, being a good runner was a win-win situation. So you see, endurance running, combined with their flexible diet, made early Homo super adaptable. They could roll with the punches, so to speak, and thrive in these constantly changing environments. But hold on a second. There's another piece to this puzzle that's super important. These climate swings also had a huge impact on their social lives. When resources were scarce, groups had to cooperate to survive, right? They had to share food, take care of each other, and work together to find new sources of food and water. And this cooperation, this social bonding, might be one of the reasons why humans are so well human. Think about it. When you're constantly interacting with others, you need to be able to read their faces, understand their emotions, and communicate effectively. And as groups got bigger and more complex, they needed ways to organize themselves, resolve conflicts, and pass on knowledge to the next generation. So, all those challenges might have actually kick-started the evolution of human intelligence and culture. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So the tough times, the unpredictable environment, those might have actually been the seeds of our humanity. It's like those motivational posters that say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but like for an entire species. Now let's shift gears for a second, zoom out from Africa. Homo erectus was a trailblazer. the first hominin to venture out of the cradle of humanity and spread across Asia and even into parts of Europe. Can you imagine that journey? I mean, talk about a family vacation. New landscapes, new plants and animals, new everything. They had to figure out how to survive in scorching deserts, freezing tundras, you name it. And yet they did it. They adapted their tools, their hunting strategies, their whole way of life to conquer these new lands. It's like that saying, go big or go home, except they went big and made a new home. And along the way, guess what? They kept evolving. They gave rise to new lineages of Homo, like the Neanderthals in Europe, and Homo floresiensis on a tiny island in Indonesia. Remember that documentary about the Hobbit people?
Yeah.
Homo floresiensis, those were Homo erectus descendants, just, on a much smaller scale. Island life does that to you, apparently. So we're starting to realize that Homo erectus wasn't just one species frozen in time. They were constantly changing, branching out, becoming something new. And their spread across the globe is a testament to their amazing adaptability and resilience. But here's a question that keeps scientists up at night. Did Homo erectus leave Africa all at once, like a giant wave of migration? Or were there multiple waves, different groups heading out at different times? And what happened when they bumped into other hominin species, like the Neanderthals? Did they, swap stories around the campfire? Did they fight? Did they, interbreed? Okay, maybe that's getting a little too personal for Homo erectus, but you get the idea. It's still so much we don't know, so many mysteries to unravel. But that's what makes this whole story so fascinating, right? We're like detectives piecing together clues from fossils, tools, and even ancient DNA to understand our own origins. And as we dig deeper, we're realizing that the story of Homo erectus is way more complex and nuanced than we ever imagined. And it's a story that's still being written. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at one of the most famous Homo erectus discoveries, the Nariokotome boy. This almost complete skeleton found in Kenya gives us an incredible glimpse into how these ancient humans grew up. And guess what? They were basically teenagers before most modern humans are even out of diapers. I mean, talk about hitting puberty early. This Nariokotome boy was only around 12 years old when he died, but he was already super tall and had almost reached his adult size. It's like their bodies were on fast forward, growing up way quicker than ours. And this faster growth rate wasn't just about height. It seems their brains were also maturing more quickly. They didn't have the same long childhood that we do, where we can learn and play and explore. They had to grow up fast because life back then was tough, and reaching maturity quickly was crucial for survival. So how did they manage to grow bigger brains while also growing up so fast? That's a question that's got scientists scratching their heads. One idea is that their brains developed differently, maybe growing more rapidly early on. Another possibility is that their brains were just more efficient, packing more neurons into a smaller space. Whatever the explanation, it's clear that Homo erectus was pushing the boundaries of brain evolution. They were finding ways to balance a need to grow up quickly with the demands of increasing intelligence. And it set the stage for the emergence of even bigger brained hominins down the line, ultimately leading to Wallace. But here's another twist. While their bodies were racing ahead, their teeth were taking their sweet time to develop. It's like their bodies couldn't quite make up their minds. This might have been an adaptation to their diet if they were eating more meat, which is easier to digest than tough plants. They wouldn't have needed those massive, powerful chewing teeth, and this would have freed up resources for other things like, growing that impressive brain of theirs. It's almost like evolution was playing a balancing act, fine-tuning different parts of their development to make them as successful as possible. But speaking of success, there's one last piece of the Homo erectus puzzle that we need to talk about: their culture. I know culture sounds kind of fancy for a bunch of ancient humans, right? But trust me, these guys were more than just grunting cavemen. They had traditions, they made art, they cared for their sick and elderly. They were in many ways surprisingly like us. And one of the most striking examples of their culture is their use of fire. Remember how we talked about fire being a game changer? Well, it wasn't just about warmth and protection. It was also about bringing people together. Imagine sitting around a campfire with your family or your tribe, sharing stories, laughing, cooking food, and just enjoying each other's company. Fire created a sense of community. a shared experience that would have strengthened social bonds and fostered cooperation. And the social aspect of fire might have been just as important as its practical uses. It might have helped Homo erectus develop their complex communication skills, their ability to work together, and even their capacity for empathy and compassion. So fire wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of warmth, of safety, of togetherness. And it might have played a key role in shaping Homo erectus into the social, intelligent, and adaptable species they were. But the story of their culture doesn't end there. They also made beautiful tools, sometimes even decorating them with intricate patterns. They cared for their sick and injured, as evidenced by fossils showing signs of healed injuries. And they might have even had rituals and beliefs, although those are harder to decipher from the archaeological record. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dives, let's take a moment to appreciate Homo erectus for who they truly were: complex, resourceful, and surprisingly human. They were pioneers pushing the boundaries of what was possible and setting the stage for our own evolution. Their story is a reminder that we are not just the product of our genes, but also of our culture, our experiences, and the challenges we face together. But their story also raises some fascinating questions about our own species. How has our modern lifestyle with its technology and comforts affected our own growth and development? Have we traded a faster growth rate for a longer childhood and a larger brain? And what are the implications of this trade-off for our health, our behavior, and our future? These are questions we'll explore in more depth in the final part of our deep dive, but for now, let's just marvel at the remarkable journey of Homo erectus, a species that truly embodies the spirit of adaptation, innovation, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Okay, so we've been on this epic journey through millions of years of human evolution, right? We've talked about Homo habilis, Homo erectus, those amazing Achillean hand axes. It's been a whirlwind. But, the thing that really gets me is it's not just about the fossils and tools, It's about the story they tell. It's about understanding where we came from and how we became the humans we are today.
And one of the biggest takeaways for me is just how resilient our ancestors were. I mean, they faced challenges that would make most of us totally freak out. Climate change, predators, in a competition for resources. It was a tough world out there. But they didn't just survive, they thrived. They adapted, they innovated, they spread across the globe, and they did it all with a fraction of the brain power and technology that we have today. It's kind of humbling, right? So what can we learn from them? I think one of the biggest lessons is the importance of adaptability in today's world. Things are changing so fast. Technology, climate, kuchak at everything. And we need to be able to roll with the punches, just like Homo erectus did. Another lesson is the power of cooperation. Remember how we talked about how those tough times might have actually forced early humans to work together? Well, I think that's still relevant today. We can't solve the big problems we're facing, climate change, inequality, you name it, unless we work together. It's like divide and conquer, but in reverse.
And finally, I think the story of Homo erectus reminds us to never underestimate the power of the human spirit. They faced incredible odds, but they never gave up. They kept pushing forward, exploring new frontiers and creating new possibilities. And that's a legacy that we should all be proud of. So the next time you're feeling overwhelmed by the world, just think about Homo erectus. They were out there 2 million years ago, figuring things out, adapting, and making the best of what they had. And if they could do it, so can we. All right, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the origin and early evolution of Homo erectus. Hope you enjoyed the ride and maybe even learned a thing or two along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep marveling at the amazing story of human evolution.